In the summer of 1986, a father and his 9-year-old daughter drove into the Blue Ridge Mountains for a weekend camping trip and vanished. Days later, their pickup was found abandoned beside a burned-down hunting cabin. No bodies, no signs of a struggle. Just ash, charred stone, and silence. 38 years later, a park ranger repairing a collapsed trail uncovers something sealed beneath the ruins. A root cellar, and inside, a fireproof lockbox that was never meant to be found. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button if you love cold case mysteries, hidden places, and psychological thrillers that unravel layer by layer. March 9th, 2024. Location: Burke County, North Carolina. The shovel struck something solid. Park Ranger Elise Granger paused, brushing away dirt with gloved hands. She had been clearing debris from a landslide-prone ridge near Burnt Hollow Trailhead, long abandoned, rarely visited. Beneath the packed soil was stone, not natural, not like the boulders that littered the mountain. She crouched, scraping carefully. What emerged was unmistakable. Mortared bricks, weathered, scorched, sealed around a rusted iron ring embedded in what appeared to be a trap door. The collapsed forest floor had hidden it for decades, and now it had split open. Elise reached for her radio, breath caught in her throat. Dispatch. I think I found something under the old cabin site. July 14th, 1986. Location: Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina. The pickup truck sat crooked at the edge of the gravel road, one tire half buried in a rut, like it had rolled to a stop and never moved again. Sheriff Alan Boyd climbed out of his cruiser and adjusted his hat against the rising heat. Summer cicadas screamed through the pines. The mountain air was thick with sap and the faint metallic scent of scorched timber. Behind him, Deputy Marie Latimer stood in the dust, squinting at the forest that crowded the road's edge. The truck, a '78 Ford F-150, was empty. No keys, no bags, no signs of struggle, just silence. A cooler sat in the bed, still latched shut. The passenger window was halfway down. A pink windbreaker, child-sized, hung from the back of the seat. Alan rubbed his jaw. "This the Halbrook truck?" he asked. Marie checked the license plate on her notepad. "Yeah, matches what Janice Halbrook gave us. Said her husband took their daughter up here to camp Saturday morning. That was 2 days ago. She said they were supposed to be back last night." Alan looked down the embankment. Through the trees, barely visible in the distance, was the skeletal frame of what had once been a hunting cabin. The roof was gone, blackened beams pointing like ribs toward the sky. Crows circled overhead. "There was a fire," Marie said. "Recently? Looks like a day, maybe less. Forest Service might have more." Alan nodded and started down the slope. The pine needles were slick underfoot, and the heat pressed in tighter the farther they descended. It wasn't until they reached the ruins that he smelled it. Something bitter beneath the charcoal and wet ash. Something human. The cabin was a ruin of stone and timber. The fireplace was still standing, a lone chimney like a grave marker. Burned tin cans littered the hearth. Bits of melted plastic clung to blackened beams. Marie circled around the far side and called out, "Over here." Alan stepped carefully over a collapsed wall and joined her. She stood at the edge of a scorched clearing. Near her boots, the ground was dark, sunken, stained. The remnants of what might have been cloth clung to the soil. A melted zipper. Something small and round, scorched black but unmistakable. A child's shoe. Marie crouched down, careful not to disturb the scene. She used a pen to lift what was left of the fabric. There was something red beneath it. Plastic. "Lunchbox," she said quietly. Alan stared at it. The metal edges were warped. A faded sticker of Rainbow Bright peeled from the lid. "Janice said Lucia was 9, he asked." Marie nodded. "Yeah, packed lunch, water bottles. They were just going for the weekend. Doesn't look like they made it past Saturday." Alan stood in the middle of the blackened shell and turned slowly. No bodies, no obvious signs of violence. But something about the way the cabin burned felt wrong. The fire hadn't spread beyond its frame. The surrounding trees were untouched, contained, controlled. He looked at the fireplace again. "There's no body here," he muttered. "Just remnants." Marie looked up. "So what do you think?" "I think someone wanted us to think they died here," Alan said. "But I don't see bones. No human remains. No heat signature of a flash burn. This fire was hot, but too clean." Marie frowned. "You think they staged it?" "I think we need to call the arson investigator and get K9 units up here." He took another slow glance around the clearing. "And someone needs to notify Janice Halbrook. In Austin, 2 hours south of the mountains." Janice Halbrook stood at the kitchen sink staring into the yard, clutching the edge of the counter. Her sister, Beth, sat at the table behind her, slowly flipping through Lucia's coloring books like they were sacred texts. "They're just late," Beth said softly. "You know Jim. He loses track of time up there. They were supposed to be back last night." Janice's voice was flat. "I called his sister, the dental office. No one's heard anything." "What about that ranger post he always checked in at?" "Left a message. No response yet." Beth stood and crossed to her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe the truck broke down." Janice didn't reply. Her eyes were fixed on the swing set in the yard. Lucia's shoes were still on the porch. A Tupperware of grape jelly sandwiches sat untouched in the fridge. She had packed them that morning. She had kissed her daughter goodbye on the cheek. Jim had promised they'd be back by Sunday dinner. Instead, her house was quiet, still. And when the phone rang, she knew before she picked it up that the silence had changed. Back in Burke County, the forensics team arrived by mid-afternoon. They combed the cabin site with gloved hands and metal probes. 2 K9 officers searched the perimeter. One of the dogs picked up a scent trail north of the cabin, but it faded within 30 yards near a set of tire tracks in the dirt. Alan crouched beside a technician examining the fire pit remains. Charcoal, burned paper, a fragment of what looked like a license plate. Another technician held up a charred thermos and a scorched denim jacket. "There's no body here," she confirmed. "No bone fragments. If anyone was inside when this burned, they weren't in here long." Alan looked again at the child's shoe. It sat in a plastic evidence bag now, one lace missing, the rubber toe warped from heat. Marie joined him with a clipboard. "Fire marshal says the blaze started near the fireplace. No accelerant residue, but controlled burn pattern. Could have been intentional." "Anything from the K9? "Just those tracks. And something else." She nodded toward the trees. "We found a cigarette pack, old, but not from the Halbrooks. No prints yet." Alan stood and looked at the ruined cabin, his expression tightening. "Something happened here," he said. "But whatever it was, someone tried damn hard to make it disappear." March 10th, 2024. Location: Burnt Hollow Trail, Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina. The wind whistled through the trees as Ranger Elise Granger crouched near the ruined hearth, her gloved fingers brushing ash from the edge of the trap door. What she'd uncovered yesterday felt like a secret the mountain never meant to give up. A hidden stone structure sealed with mortar, iron-ringed like a storm shelter. She hadn't slept. Not really. Just replayed the moment over and over. The scrape of the shovel, the give of the soil, the clang of metal on brick. Now, with her sight temporarily closed and law enforcement on standby, she waited for the local fire marshal and crime scene team to arrive. She hadn't told them everything. Not yet. Not until she could confirm what she saw this morning after returning with a crowbar and flashlight. There was something inside. She stood as she heard the approach of boots through brush. Sheriff Rebecca Lane, a stern woman with crow's feet and sharp instincts. emerged from the trees alongside a young evidence tech hauling a case of tools. "You're the one who called it in?" Lane asked, eyeing the scorched remnants of the long-burned cabin. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Elise Granger. Been patrolling this ridge 5 years. That cabin's just a skeleton now. Locals call it Devil's Elbow. No one's come up here in decades, not since—" She stopped herself. Lane looked her over. "Not since the Halbrook case." Elise nodded. "Didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I found this." She led the sheriff across the brittle black flooring and pointed to the exposed trap door. It was sealed, deep, but when the earth collapsed last week after rain, part of it gave out. Lane studied the structure carefully. This wasn't part of the original cabin, was it? Number Y checked ranger maps from the 1950s. No mention of a cellar. Not even a root storage pit. Whoever built this didn't want it found. The sheriff knelt, her flashlight beam slipping through a crack where Elise had already pried a stone loose. "What's inside?" she asked. "I didn't open it fully," Elise said, "but enough to see the corner of a box. Fireproof, military style. I didn't touch it." Lane stood and nodded to the tech. "Let's get it open. Carefully." It took 20 minutes. With tools and caution, they lifted the sealed hatch, revealing a short ladder descending into darkness. The air that escaped was dry, ancient, and laced with mildew and rust. Lane went down first. Elise followed. The cellar was no wider than 10 feet, a square tomb of rock and packed dirt. Old canned goods sat in decayed crates. A rusted lantern hung from a nail. At the far corner, partially covered by a mildewed tarp, was the lockbox, black, heavy, fireproof. Lane brushed away debris and ran her gloved hand along the latches. "No heat damage," she muttered. "This thing survived untouched." She popped the latches. The lid creaked open. Inside was a stack of items, dry, organized. Time capsules. Elise knelt closer. There was a Polaroid photograph on top, its edges curled slightly. She leaned in. A little girl. Long brown hair. Barefoot on a stone porch, smiling with her arms wrapped around a man with a thick mustache and sunburned skin. "They match," Elise whispered. "That's Lucia Halbrook and her dad." Lane said nothing for a long time. She was staring at what lay beneath the photo. A spiral notebook, the cover warped from pressure. Written in pen across the top, "For whoever finds this, July 15th, 1986. Back in Austin, Margaret Halbrook gripped her tea mug with trembling hands. Her name hadn't been Margaret in years. She went by Janice now, her middle name. A quiet shift she made after the grief threatened to unmake her. After Jim and Lucia vanished. After the cabin burned and everyone stopped calling. She never remarried. Never left the house Jim built for them. And never stopped looking. When the call came that morning, she almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar. The voice was calm. Professional. "Mrs. Halbrook, I'm Sheriff Rebecca Lane out of Burke County. We found something in connection to your husband and daughter's case. We'd like to ask you to come identify it in person." Margaret's hands had gone numb. She could barely hold the pen to write down the directions. And when she called her sister Doris, all she could say was, "It's about Lucia." 3 hours later, they were winding their way up a mountain road in a sheriff's vehicle. Margaret sat in the back seat beside Doris, her knuckles white around her purse strap. She hadn't been this far north in almost 40 years. "Do you remember that weekend?" Doris asked gently. "All of it." Margaret's voice was firm. "Jim packed the cooler. I braided Lucia's hair. She made me promise we'd go get blueberry pancakes when they got back." Doris didn't reply. She reached over and took her sister's hand. Ahead, the cruiser pulled into a clearing beside a ranger's truck. Yellow tape flapped lazily in the breeze around the collapsed ruins. The cabin, or what remained of it, stood like a memory burned into the mountain. Elise Granger met them at the edge of the trail. "I'm sorry for the circumstances," she said, voice quiet but steady. "But I think it's time someone knew what was buried here." She led them carefully across the burned flooring to the edge of the opened cellar. When Sheriff Lane handed Margaret the Polaroid, her breath caught in her throat. "That was the porch at the cabin," she whispered. "Lucia had just lost a tooth. She was so proud of that gap." Her voice trembled. "And Jim, he looks like he was trying to stay strong for her." Beneath the photo was the spiral notebook. Elise offered it to her. "We haven't read it yet. We thought it should be you." Margaret took it slowly. The first page was smudged at the corner but still legible. "If you're reading this, we didn't make it out. My name is Jim Halbrook. My daughter is Lucia. She's 9. We've been hiding for 2 days from a man who followed us up here. I think he meant to hurt us. I've locked us in this cellar. I've sealed it the best I can. I don't know if anyone will find us, but if you do, please tell my wife I tried." Margaret's legs nearly gave out. Doris caught her before she fell. July 13th, 1986. Location: Burnt Hollow Cabin, Blue Ridge Mountains. Jim Halbrook sat on the porch of the old hunting cabin, sweat sliding down his neck as he watched the trees shift in the breeze. The late afternoon light broke through the pines in amber shards, casting long shadows across the ridge. The air was warm, damp, and strangely quiet. No bird song, no wind. Just the rhythmic creak of the porch swing where Lucia sat, humming softly as she flipped through her paperback. She wore her pink tank top and striped shorts, legs dangling, toes dusty. Her rainbow-bright lunchbox sat beside her. She hadn't touched her sandwich. Jim took a slow sip from his canteen, his eyes scanning the trail beyond the clearing. Something about today felt off. He'd noticed it that morning. A strange sound in the woods, footsteps where there shouldn't have been any, a flash of movement through the trees. He'd told himself it was nothing, a deer maybe, a squirrel. But now, hours later, his unease hadn't lifted. "You doing okay, Peanut?" he asked. Lucia nodded, eyes still on her book. "It's hot. Want to dip your feet in the creek again?" She shook her head. Too many bugs. He smiled and stood, brushing dust from his jeans. "I'll go gather kindling. We'll get a little fire going, make some hot dogs. Maybe s'mores." Lucia perked up at that. "Can I toast mine this time?" "You bet." He ruffled her hair and stepped off the porch, boots crunching through leaves as he made his way behind the cabin. That's when he saw it. A boot print, deep, not his, not Lucia's, large, heavy, and fresh. He crouched, tracing the edges of the print with one finger. Then he looked up, heart thudding. On the far tree trunk, faint but there, was a mark, scraped into the bark, 3 vertical lines. He turned back toward the cabin, his voice steady but low. "Lucia, come inside." She looked up. "Why?" "Now, sweetheart, please." Something in his tone made her obey. She stood, lunchbox in hand, and moved through the screen door. Jim followed, locking it behind him. Inside, the cabin was dark and cool. One room, old cot in the corner, a wood stove against the wall. He pulled the curtains closed, heart hammering in his chest. "Daddy, what's wrong?" He crouched down to her level, hands on her shoulders. "Nothing bad, okay? I saw someone near the trail. I think they're lost. But just in case, we're gonna stay inside for a bit." Lucia looked worried. "You think they're scary?" Jim hesitated. Then he nodded. "Maybe." That night, Jim didn't sleep. He sat in the wooden chair by the stove, rifle across his lap, ears tuned to every creak of the cabin. Lucia had curled up in her sleeping bag beside him, thumb in her mouth, her other hand gripping his shirt. Sometime after midnight, it began. The creaking, the soft crunch of feet on pine needles, then the knock. One knock, just one. Jim stood slowly, moved toward the window. He saw a figure just beyond the tree line. Not moving, just standing. He raised the rifle and shouted, "Get out of here! I'm armed!" No response. "Lucia, get your things," he said quietly. "We're leaving." He opened the trapdoor to the root cellar, a feature he'd found only by chance, half buried beneath pine needles behind the cabin. It was small but secure, reinforced stone. No one would find them down there unless they knew it was there. Lucia looked confused. "Are we hiding?" "Just for a little while." He lowered her in first, then followed, pulling the heavy hatch closed behind them. The world above faded into silence. In the notebook, the next entry was written in shakier handwriting. "We've been down here all night. I heard him walking around up there. He tried the door, tried the window, but he never spoke, never made a sound. He's still out there, I can feel it. I don't know how long we can stay here. I left food up top, just water down here now. Lucia's being brave, but she's scared. I keep telling her we're camping in a secret fort." She smiled. "But it's fading. If someone finds this, he's still out there. I don't know who he is, but he followed us, and he's waiting." July 14th, 1986. The last note. He set fire to the cabin. I saw the smoke through the crack in the trap door. We could hear the wood crackling. The smoke came in slow, then fast. I stuffed towels in the corners. We barely breathed. Lucia cried for an hour, then fell asleep in my arms. She's still breathing. I don't know what kind of man burns a place down without checking if anyone's inside. I think he thought we ran, or he wanted to cover something up. We can't go up yet, not until morning. But if we don't make it, I need someone to know I did everything I could. For her. My name is Jim Halbrook. My daughter is Lucia. And we didn't leave. We hid. We survived the fire. And we're still here. March 10th, 2024. Location: Burnt Hollow Root Cellar, Blue Ridge Mountains. The light was fading fast by the time Sheriff Lane and Elise finished photographing every angle of the root cellar. The Polaroid and spiral notebook had already been logged, sealed in evidence bags, and secured in the ranger's truck. Margaret and Doris had returned to the ranger station with a deputy for warmth and rest, but neither woman had spoken much on the ride back. Elise remained behind, uneasy. She crouched again at the foot of the ladder, brushing soot from the cellar's far corner where the earth had collapsed slightly, exposing a shallow cavity beneath what had once been a support beam. Something caught the beam of her flashlight. Fabric, color. "Elise," Lane called from above. "What are you doing?" "There's something else," Elise replied, reaching in with gloved fingers. "I think it's—" She pulled it free slowly, gently. It was a child's handbag, small, rectangular, baby blue with white trim. The plastic surface was streaked with soot, but otherwise intact. A melted patch of vinyl had warped the strap. The clasp was rusted, but when Elise opened it, the interior was clean, dry. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper. A Barbie sticker, sun-faded, clung to the corner. She passed it up to Lane. "Another message." Lane unfolded it. The handwriting was childlike, messy but legible. "If you find this, my name is Lucia Halbrook. My daddy is with me. We are hiding from the man in the trees. I don't want to die. Please tell my mommy I was good." I didn't cry. Lane swallowed hard. Elise blinked rapidly. She was writing goodbye. "There's more in the bag," Lane said quietly. Elise turned it upside down. A small plastic barrette clattered into her palm. A stub of pink crayon. And then something heavier. A cassette tape. Half melted. Warped slightly along one edge, but still labeled. "Lucia, July 12th. Lane turned it over in her gloved hand. "You think there's anything still on it?" "I know a guy," Elise said. "Works at a wildlife audio lab in Boone. If anyone can recover it, he can." Lane slid the tape into a separate evidence pouch. "Have it processed immediately," she said. "Chain of custody starts with you." As they climbed out of the cellar, Elise paused and looked back into the darkness one last time. She could still feel the chill, still hear the scratch of dried roots against stone, still imagine the sound of a child whispering goodbye to a world she thought would never find her. March 11th, 2024. Boone Wildlife Audio Lab. The building looked more like a bunker than a research facility. Cinderblock walls, no windows, humming with white noise from within. Elise handed the cassette tape to Dr. Brennan Kessler, a field audio specialist and longtime acquaintance from her time in forestry. "This thing looks like it went through hell," he said, inspecting it with tweezers. "It did. And if there's anything you can do to salvage the audio, I need it." Brennan raised an eyebrow. "What's on it?" "A child's voice," Elise said. "From 1986, a missing girl. We found it yesterday." He nodded, more serious now. "I'll get it baked and transferred. Give me 90 minutes. 2 hours later, Elise sat with headphones pressed to her ears in the dim sound booth. Brennan watched her through the glass as the digitized waveform played on the screen. She didn't move, didn't blink, just listened. Inside the tape, the past spoke back. Tape begins, static clicks. Lucia, whispering, "My name is Lucia Halbrook. I'm 9. I'm hiding with my dad in the basement under the cabin. He says not to talk loud, but I'm scared." We heard the man again. He was outside. He had something metal in his hand. "Daddy says it's not safe to go up. He said we'll stay here one more night. He's going to block the air holes so the smoke doesn't get in." Long pause. Lucia breathes quietly. "Mommy, I hope you're not crying. I was brave. I was brave," Daddy said. "I'm going to keep my lunchbox in case we get out. Okay. I'm turning this off now. I love you, Mommy." Click. Tape ends. Elise set the headphones down with shaking hands. "She was still alive when they set that fire," she whispered. Brennan nodded. "The quality's degraded, but that was a girl saying goodbye." Later. That evening. Ranger Station. Margaret sat at the Ranger Station conference table, the blue handbag beside her. She refused to let it out of her sight. She had cleaned the soot from its surface, wiped the clasp, run her fingers over every inch of the vinyl. "This was hers," she said softly. "She bought it with her allowance. Jim told me she picked the blue because it was grown-up Barbie blue, not baby blue." Doris sat beside her, holding a hot cup of tea with both hands. "She was alive," Margaret continued, "for at least 2 days. She survived the fire. They both did." Sheriff Lane entered the room with Elise and Brennan behind her. Margaret looked up as Lane placed a laptop on the table. "We recovered audio from the tape," Lane said. "It's Lucia's voice. She made it the day before the fire. Would you like to hear it?" Margaret nodded, lips trembling. Lane pressed play. As Lucia's voice filled the room, Margaret covered her mouth, sobbing silently. Doris reached over and squeezed her arm. They listened to every word. And when it ended, the silence that followed was devastating. Margaret straightened slowly, her eyes red but clear. "She didn't die that night." Lane hesitated. "We can't say for certain. She said she was saving her lunchbox, that she wanted to bring it out with her. If she was going to die, she wouldn't be planning." Doris nodded. "Jim was clever. If he survived the fire, he would have waited for night. He would have carried her out." Margaret turned to Lane. "If there's any chance Lucia lived past that night, then someone took her." July 14th, 1986. Location: Burnt Hollow Ridge. Blue Ridge Mountains. He waited until just past midnight. The woods were quiet, even the cicadas silenced. The smoke had thinned, and the fire had done its job. The man crouched at the edge of the clearing, a red gas can cooling in the grass behind him, the scent of vapor still clinging to his clothes. The cabin was nothing more than glowing embers and blackened frame now. The roof had collapsed inward hours ago, flames eating their way through decades of dry wood. He'd watched the entire thing from the trees, expression unreadable. He hadn't seen anyone run out. He hadn't expected to. He stood slowly, stepping into the clearing. His boots cracked through the crust of charcoal and ash. He moved like a man on a mission, deliberate, unhurried, like he'd done this before. Because he had. He'd been following them since Friday. From the moment the man and his little girl stopped at the gas station in Morganton. The girl had picked out a soda. The man, still in a dress shirt like he hadn't changed from work, had filled up the red pickup and bought 2 bags of ice. The man had said something to the cashier about taking his daughter up to the family cabin. "Just us two," he'd added. "Get her away from all the noise." He remembered the way the little girl had held her dad's hand. Too trusting, too easy, the same way they always were. Now he knelt near the hearth, where the stone still radiated heat. Bits of melted metal clung to the ash. He used a stick to poke through what remained of the stove. A rusted pan, part of a tin can, but no bodies. He frowned. He'd done a full circle around the cabin before lighting the fire. The truck was still up on the ridge. Their gear had been laid out, blankets, food, water, but something about it all felt unfinished. The man had made a mistake. He didn't just run. He hid. The stranger turned back toward the woods and walked 20 yards to where a pine tree stood with its lower branches broken. He knelt again and examined the ground. A boot print, smaller, lighter, child's. He grinned slightly. Later that night, Lucia lay in the root cellar, eyes open, body trembling. Her ears rang from the heat. Smoke had seeped in earlier, thick and choking, but her dad had wrapped wet towels around the vents and held her close until her coughing stopped. Now, everything was still again. She could hear her father's breathing, hear his heartbeat beneath her cheek. "Daddy," she whispered, "is it over?" "I think so," Jim murmured. They lay together on the dirt floor, wrapped in the emergency blanket. He hadn't moved in hours, just listened, waited, and that's when he heard it. Footsteps, slow, purposeful, right above them. He held his breath. A pause, then a scraping noise. Wood against stone. Something shifting near the edge of the hatch. A dragging sound, like someone pulling a branch or beam across the floor. He moved his hand gently over Lucia's mouth and pulled her closer. She froze, clutching his shirt. The footsteps circled once, twice, then silence. For almost an hour. Then, they were gone. July 15th, 1986. Dawn. The man returned just before sunrise. He stood at the crest of the trail above the cabin site, watching the smoke curl lazily into the morning air. His hands were blackened with soot, his face streaked with sweat. He pulled something from his pocket, a pink beret, warped slightly from heat. He turned it over once, then tossed it into the ferns beside the trail. Then he walked back to the road where his vehicle waited. Not the truck he'd used before. This one was different. Older. Plates removed. He drove slowly, gravel crunching beneath the tires, until the road curved out of sight, leaving behind only the ashes and the secrets buried beneath them. March 12th, 2024. Burke County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Lane tapped the photograph gently. It was a scan from the old evidence archive, a blurry still from a 1986 gas station security camera. The resolution was poor, but the details matched. Man in jeans, button-up shirt, aviator sunglasses, red gas can in hand. Elise leaned over her shoulder. "That's him?" "We think so." Witness back then described a man buying gas the same morning the Hallbrooks went missing. Paid in cash. No name. But the timestamp lines up. Margaret sat nearby, holding the now sealed handbag in her lap. "That gas can," she said softly. "It's in the police photos from the cabin. Burned plastic handle. They found it near the tree line." Lane nodded. "We just never had a suspect. No fingerprints, no license plate." Doris leaned forward. "You think this man burned the cabin?" "I think he watched it," Lane replied. "I think he waited, and I think he took something before he left." Margaret's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Then my daughter might have survived the fire, only to be taken by him." Lane said nothing, but she didn't argue. March 13th, 2024. Location: Austin, Texas. Halbrook residence. The attic was musty, layered in the same fine dust that had settled over everything Margaret Halbrook never had the heart to throw away. Doris stood at the bottom of the ladder. "Are you sure you want to do this now?" Margaret didn't answer. Her hands were already on the old pine desk shoved against the back wall. It had belonged to Jim. His filing drawer still labeled in faded masking tape. Receipts, photos, trip journals. She opened the middle drawer and pulled out a shallow tin box. Inside were several rolls of undeveloped 35mm film. She held one up to the attic light. The label on it read in Jim's handwriting, "Burnt Hollow, July '86. Her heart seized. "Doris," she called softly. "He took pictures." Before they disappeared. 3 hours later, Austin Film and Memory Lab. The technician looked up from his station, brows raised. "You said this is from 1986. Margaret nodded. Elise Granger stood beside her, having flown in from North Carolina that morning with Sheriff Lane's blessing. "It's in surprisingly good shape," the tech continued. "A little faded, some heat warping, but I can recover most of the images. Want me to print and digitize?" "Yes," Margaret said. "All of them." An hour later, the photos were laid out in a single long row on the counter, glossy and still drying. Lucia's face was in nearly every frame. Barefoot on the porch, sitting on a log eating a sandwich, waving a stick like a magic wand. Her smile was wide. Her hair pulled back in pigtails. Jim appeared in a few. He was always watching her, always just out of frame, like he never wanted to take the attention from his daughter. And then Elise stopped. "There," she said, pointing to one of the final images. Margaret leaned in. The photo showed Lucia sitting on a boulder at the edge of the woods. In the background, almost hidden by the trees, was a shadow of a man, just a sliver of a figure between branches. But he was there, tall, wearing a light-colored shirt, hands at his sides, watching. "Jim didn't mention anyone else on the mountain," Margaret whispered. "Because I don't think he knew," Elise said. "He didn't see him, but Lucia's body language." Lucia's head was turned slightly in the photo. Her expression was different. Curious, distracted. She'd seen him. That night, Elise's hotel room. Elise stared at the photo on her laptop, digitally enhanced and color-corrected. The man's face was partially obscured, but his build, his posture, it reminded her of something. She flipped open the case file from Sheriff Lane, pulled out the scanned gas station photo from 1986. She placed the two side by side. They matched. Same height, same shirt, same strange stillness in the way he stood, like he belonged to the background. She texted Lane immediately. "We have a match. The man from the gas station was on the mountain. In Jim's photos, Lucia saw him." And then she typed another line. "He didn't come for the cabin. He came for them." March 14th, 2024. Location: Burke County, North Carolina. Sheriff Rebecca Lane stepped out of her cruiser and stared at the sagging roofline of the Red Pines Motor Lodge, a squat L-shaped building 10 miles south of Burnt Hollow. The sign still flickered "Vacancy" in faded neon. Paint peeled from the door frames. A rusted ice machine stood silent under a cracked awning. Inside, the front office smelled of stale cigarettes and bleach. The man behind the counter, maybe late 60s, looked up from a worn Sudoku book. "You're here about 1986, he said before she could speak. "I heard from dispatch." Lane showed her badge. "You the owner?" "Sort of. I manage it now. My dad ran it back then, Harold Tripp. He kept everything. Had a thing about records." Lane followed him into a back room. File cabinets lined the wall. One sat open already, labeled 1986. "I pulled July for you. You're lucky. He was still using paper then. Switched to digital in the 90s. He handed her a leather-bound guest ledger with sun-warped pages. Lane sat at the table, flipping slowly through July entries. Room 8, Room 3, Room 5, and then, on July 11th. Room 6, James Kell, paid cash. 2 nights a phone number field left blank. Plate number, none recorded. Lane squinted. "Do you remember this guest?" Tripp shrugged. "Nope, but he didn't use his real name. Nobody used James Kell. That's the name from that horror book, right? The cannibal one." Lane stiffened. "You mean The Silence of the Lambs?" "Yeah, that guy. Hannibal's fake name. My dad used to joke about it. Said anyone checking in with a fake movie name probably didn't want to be remembered." She pulled her gloves on. "Mind if I borrow this page?" He nodded. "Just leave the rest of the book here." Lane slipped the page into an evidence sleeve, then paused. Something shimmered faintly on the upper right corner, where the man had signed. An oily residue. "Do you still have the old fingerprint kit?" she asked. The manager grinned. "You think I don't?" 2 hours later, Burke County Forensics Lab. The partial print was faint, smudged at the edges, but usable. Lane stood over the tech's shoulder as he scanned it into the database. "I've got a match," he said, eyes widening. Lane held her breath. Name, Victor Dane Tillman. Dub, January 12th, 1949. Known aliases, James Kell, Vincent Dale, Curtis Roan. Status, deceased, reported. Last confirmed sighting, 1986, Tennessee border, presumed dead. 1987, no body recovered. Lane stared at the screen. "No," she said. "He's not dead." Background check, compiled by Elise Granger, Victor Dane Tillman. Born in Ohio. Multiple arrests between 1974 to 1985 for trespassing, assault, and suspected abductions. Never convicted. Known to use multiple identities. Often lived off-grid, staying in cheap motels, forest shacks, and remote campgrounds. Former electrician and wilderness guide. Last confirmed sighting, a gas station outside Kingsport, Tennessee, in August 1986, weeks after the Holbrooks vanished. Vehicle, 1978 brown Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, unregistered after 1987. Notable detail, Tillman was briefly investigated in 2 separate disappearances, a boy from Kentucky in 1982 and a girl from Missouri in 1985. No charges were filed. Both cases remain unsolved. March 15th, 2024. Halbrook residents Margaret sat at the kitchen table with Elise, Sheriff Lane, and Doris. "So you're saying this man, this Tillman, was stalking them?" Margaret asked, voice hollow. Lane nodded. "We believe he followed Jim and Lucia to the cabin, stayed nearby, waited. We now know he used a fake name to check into a motel less than 15 miles from the trailhead. And he had a red gas can." Margaret clutched the developed photo in her hand, the one showing the sliver of a man between trees. "He's in this picture. Lucia saw him." "We believe he returned after the fire," Elise added. "And he may have found the root cellar." Margaret looked up sharply. "Then, if he opened it and found them," her voice cracked, "did he kill them or—" "We don't know yet," Lane said. "But Tillman didn't resurface again. No arrest records, no bank use, Nothing. Elise leaned forward. Or he took someone with him. Someone small. Someone who could be hidden. The table fell silent. March 16th, 2024. Location: Pisgah National Forest, North Carolina. The road narrowed until it was barely more than 2 ruts carved into the mountainside. Elise Granger's tires cracked over fallen twigs and patches of frost that hadn't yet melted in the early morning sun. She followed the GPS pin Lane had sent her, coordinates tied to an old land deed in Victor Dane Tillman's name, though it had been listed under his uncle's since the 60s. The cabin wasn't visible from the main road. That was the point. It emerged slowly, log-framed, weathered by years of rot and snow. Windows boarded over, front steps sagging inward. A generator sat rusting beside the porch. Elise parked and stepped out slowly, her boots crunching on gravel, her breath visible in the cold. The front door was open, not broken, just left that way. Inside, the air was bitter and dry. Dust floated in shafts of light that pierced the slats in the boards. Animal nests in the corners, cobwebs across every beam. She moved cautiously from room to room. A tin sink, a cracked mirror, a cot with springs poking through the fabric. And then she saw it. A door on the back wall, padlocked from the outside. Elise paused, heart thudding. The wood around the latch was worn smooth, like it had been opened and shut countless times. She pulled a crowbar from her bag and wedged it under the hasp. With a sharp crack, the padlock gave way. The door creaked open. The air that rushed out was colder, stiller, heavier. The room was small, barely 8 feet wide. Walls had been insulated with foam and plywood. There was no window, no light source, just a narrow mattress on the floor, a dented metal chair, and a child's drawing pinned to the wall with a rusty nail. Elise stepped inside slowly, flashlight sweeping across the surfaces. More drawings lined the walls, crayon figures, animals, stars. One showed a girl and a man standing near what looked like a cabin. Another showed trees, always trees. On the mattress lay a single, dusty object, a plastic rainbow-bright lunchbox. Elise's breath caught in her throat. She knelt and opened it. Inside was a half-finished friendship bracelet, some broken crayons, and a folded photo of a little girl. Faded, sun-warped. Her name, Lucia, was written in block letters on the back. There was no mistaking her. It was the same face from the July 1986 photographs. Later that day, Burke County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Lane stared at the contents on the evidence table. "That lunchbox matches the one Margaret described," she said quietly. "And the drawings show a child confined in that room," Elise added. "There's food wrappers in the waste bin dated 1988. She was there at least 2 years after the fire." Lane swallowed hard. "Meaning Jim may have died, but Lucia didn't. She was taken, hidden, and kept alive." "We need DNA confirmation," Elise said. "But I believe this is where Tillman brought her, at least for a time." Lane stared at the child's drawing of 2 stick figures, one big, one small. They were holding hands. The bigger one had no face. "She drew him without eyes," Lane said quietly, like she never wanted to remember. March 17th, 2024. Halbrook Residence. Margaret clutched the drawing in gloved hands, tears streaking down her face. Doris sat beside her, silent. "I told her to be brave," Margaret whispered. "And she was." For years, Elise nodded. "She survived something unimaginable. We don't know yet how long she was kept there or if she was moved again. But what we do know is this. Your daughter didn't die in that fire." Margaret looked up, trembling. "Then where is she now?" Lane said nothing. But Elise answered, "We're going to find out." March 18th, 2024. Location: Briar Glen Adult Care Facility, Rutherford County, North Carolina. The nurse's voice was low as she led Elise and Sheriff Lane down the narrow hall. She came in sometime in the fall of '94, the nurse said. No ID, no name. Someone left her at the emergency entrance of Mercy General in Morganton and drove off. Hospital records say she was dehydrated, underweight, and unresponsive. When they realized she wouldn't or couldn't speak, they sent her here under the name Jane Glenn, after the county. Elise clutched a folder to her chest. Inside were 4 photos. Lucia Halbrook, age 9, a scanned version of the crayon drawing found in the cabin, a close-up of the Rainbow Bright lunchbox, and a recent age progression mock-up done by the state forensics artist, what Lucia might look like in her 40s. The nurse stopped outside room 12A. She doesn't speak, but she understands. Trauma, we assume. But she's never lashed out, never tried to leave. She just exists. She knocked once, then opened the door. The room was spare. A twin bed, a small bookshelf, a table covered in half-finished puzzles. The woman sat by the window in a cardigan 2 sizes too big. Her hair was shoulder-length, brown with streaks of gray. She looked younger than her file suggested, mid to late 40s at most. Her posture was curled inward, arms crossed tight across her stomach, as if always bracing for impact. She didn't look up when they entered. Lane glanced at Elise. Elise stepped forward and gently set the folder on the table. I brought some pictures, she said softly. No response. She opened to the first one. Lucia, at age 9, standing in front of the cabin. Rainbow Bright lunchbox in hand, smiling. The woman's body stiffened. Elise continued, voice even. Your name might be Lucia Halbrook. You disappeared in July of 1986. You were with your father in the mountains. Someone took you. Still no sound, but the woman's fingers twitched. Elise placed the second image in front of her, the child's drawing from the hidden room, the crayon figures holding hands. The woman blinked, then reached out slowly and traced the stick figure child with one finger. Her breathing quickened. Elise watched carefully. You drew that, didn't you? The woman's eyes welled, but still she didn't speak. Lane took out the final photo, the mock-up showing what Lucia might look like now. The woman stared at it, then slowly raised a hand to her own face, as if comparing. And finally, she nodded. Just once. 2 hours later. Interview room, Briar Glen facility. Elise sat across from her, this time without Lane, just the 2 of them. The woman, still silent, clutched a small stuffed rabbit she'd kept since arrival, its ears worn down to threads. Elise placed the cassette player on the table. I'm going to play you something, she said. She hit play. Lucia, on tape. My name is Lucia Halbrook. I'm 9. We're hiding from the man in the trees. The woman broke. No sound, no scream, no word. But the sobs came in waves, racking her body, silent as snowfall. Elise crossed to her and gently took her hand. You're safe now, she whispered. You made it. The woman pulled the crayon drawing to her chest and nodded again. A single tear slid down her cheek. Later that evening, Sheriff Lane's office DNA expedited through the state lab confirmed what everyone already knew. Jane Glenn was, in fact, Lucia Margaret Halbrook, daughter of Jim and Margaret, presumed dead since 1986. She had been alive the entire time, and someone had hidden her for years. What about Tillman? Elise asked. Lane shook her head. If he's alive, he's a ghost. No records, no sightings, but someone dropped Luthi off in '94. We just don't know who. Elise nodded. Then that's where we look next. March 20th, 2024. Location, Ironvale, Tennessee. Wilkes Family Farm. The call came in just after sunrise. An old car, brown, 1978 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser had been discovered behind a rotting livestock barn on the edge of a foreclosed property outside Iron Vale. The Wilkes family had owned the farm for generations, but after the last matriarch passed, the land was auctioned. A surveyor for the new buyer found the vehicle, buried in briars and animal bones. Sheriff Lane and Elise arrived by noon, the sun cutting through skeletal trees. The car was sunken into soft earth, all 4 tires deflated. The windshield cracked, its once gleaming paint now a patchwork of rust and moss. The plates had been removed, but the VIN was intact. Lane stood over the hood as the forensics techs got to work. "This is it," she said. "Same make and model Victor Tillman drove when he disappeared. No plates, and no record of it ever being impounded." A deputy called out from the passenger side, where the door had rusted shut and crumbled under pressure. "I've got something," he said. Inside the Vista Cruiser, the interior was a time capsule. Faded upholstery, a cracked dashboard, and a glove box packed with folded maps, old receipts, and matchbooks from roadside motels across the southeast. But in the back seat was what caught their breath: a child's wool blanket, blue with white stars, still folded neatly, and beneath it, a blood-stained flannel shirt, adult-sized. Next to it, a camera, old Nikon, still intact. Lane handled it like evidence, gloved and reverent. "Let's get that film processed," she said. "Now." 6 hours later. Boone Crime Lab. The photos came back in sequence. Many were landscape shots, woods, streams, winding dirt roads. One showed the Vista Cruiser itself, parked on a ridge overlooking a valley. Another showed a small girl standing on a porch, unfamiliar to the investigators. But then came the one that made Elise stop breathing. It was taken at night, flash-blown and poorly framed, but unmistakable. Jim Halbrook, alive, eyes swollen, bruised, hands bound in front of him with wire. He sat on a wooden chair in what looked like a shed or basement, his shirt torn, matching the one found in the car. The photo timestamp, faded but legible. August 4th, 1986. Over 2 weeks after the fire. Later that night, Margaret's home, Austin Elise sat across from Margaret and Doris, the photograph in a folder between them. "We believe Jim survived the fire," Elise said gently. "He was taken, like Lucia, but we haven't found any record of him after this." Margaret opened the folder with trembling hands and looked at the image. Her mouth parted, and for a long moment she said nothing. "That's his look," she finally whispered. "He always clenched his jaw like that when he was afraid, but didn't want me to know." Doris reached across the table and placed her hand on her sister's. "They tortured him," Margaret said. "Didn't they?" Elise didn't answer directly. She didn't have to. March 21st, 2024. Lane's office. A forensics report confirmed the blood on the shirt was Jim Halbrook's. "This changes everything," Lane said. "Tillman didn't kill them both in the woods. He kept Jim alive, but for what?" Elise turned to the map found in the glove box. Dozens of hand-drawn marks, trails, cabins, one spot circled in red, deep in the Smokies. "No roads, no towns for miles," she murmured. "What's there?" Lane answered grimly. "Only one way to find out." March 22nd, 2024. Location: deep within the Great Smoky Mountains. They left the trail behind after only 40 minutes. The path to the red circle on the old map was no longer a path. Trees had reclaimed everything, and thorns tore at Elise's sleeves as she followed Sheriff Lane through dense brush and moss-slick rock. The elevation climbed steeply, each switchback narrower, the woods heavier with silence. No birds, no wind, just the sound of boots on damp earth and breath in the cold air. Lane checked the GPS again. "We're close." They broke through a line of saplings and stopped. In the clearing ahead stood a shack, barely upright, its roof caved in on one side. A collapsed chimney of old fieldstone leaned out of the frame like a broken tooth. The door hung open. "Matches the size and location," Lane murmured. This was it. They approached slowly. The smell hit Elise first. Not death, not rot, but iron, deep and metallic. Old blood in the floorboards. Inside the shack, the room was barely 10 by 10. Wooden table in the center, chains on the wall, 2 buckets, a cot frame without a mattress. Elise moved to the far corner where a square of floor planks looked newer, slightly raised. She crouched and pried them up. Beneath, a shallow cavity, about 4 feet deep, lined with stone and tightly packed soil. And in it, bones, a partial skeleton. Male. The skull crushed on one side, teeth still intact. Next to the body was a wristwatch, rusted but intact. Lane removed her glove, brushed the dirt from the cracked face. The inscription on the back was barely legible. JMH, love always, M and L. Elise closed her eyes. "Jim Holbrook," she whispered. "He never made it out," Lane said quietly. "He was buried here." They stood in silence, back at Burke County Forensics. 3 days later, dental records confirmed the remains were Jim's. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. Likely delivered by something heavy, possibly the fire poker recovered from the shack's fireplace. Lane closed the case folder and looked to Elise. Tillman kept him here, after taking Lucia. He must have moved her again later, maybe when things got too risky. But he killed Jim here. "Why keep him alive for weeks?" Elise asked. "He wasn't after money. He didn't want ransom. So why?" Lane looked toward the window. Her voice was hollow. "Because for some of these men, the suffering is the point." March 25th, 2024. Briar Glen Adult Care. Elise sat with Lucia, now officially identified, watching her gently turn over the pages of a photo album. Each one had been assembled by Margaret with the help of Doris. Childhood photos, school pictures, birthdays. Lucia's fingers paused when she reached a page with Jim on it, holding a toddler Lucia on his shoulders at the lake. A tear slid down her cheek. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out something she'd kept hidden until now. A silver chain. At the end of it, a flattened gold ring. Jim's wedding band. She placed it in Elise's hand. Elise nodded, overcome. "You never forgot him," she said. Lucia didn't nod, didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. March 30th, 2024. Location: Burnt Hollow Ridge, North Carolina. The cabin was gone. Only the stone hearth remained, half swallowed by ivy and ash. Margaret stood in the clearing alone for the first time in nearly 4 decades. The trees had grown taller. The path Jim once cleared for firewood was barely a dent in the earth. She walked slowly to the spot where the porch once stood, where she imagined her daughter's footsteps, where Jim had made his last stand. Doris waited by the truck up the ridge, giving her space. In her coat pocket, Margaret clutched Lucia's drawing, creased and faded, the crayon lines worn down by time and trembling fingers. She stood in the silence, then whispered aloud, "I know you tried to protect her." The wind stirred gently, as if answering. Meanwhile, Burke County Archive Room. Elise sat cross-legged on the floor of the records vault, sorting through boxes recovered from the Vista cruiser. Most had already been processed: maps, receipts, empty film canisters. But one envelope had been missed, tucked in the lining of the driver's seat. It was labeled in block letters, "Keep for safe." Inside were 4 Polaroids. 3 were old photos, undated, poorly lit. One showed Lucia at maybe 10, in a flannel nightgown sitting beside a lantern. Another showed a barn. The third showed a man's hands, bound with rope, blurred by motion. But the fourth made her freeze. It was a photo of the cabin, burnt hollow, taken from outside, at a distance but not too far. In the second-story window someone stood, Not Jim, not Lucia, a man. Later that night, Elise and Lane's case. Review. That's not Tillman, Lane said. He's too young. Look at the posture, the build. Elise nodded. And the date on the back, July 10th, 1986. That's before the fire. They enhanced the image. The figure wore dark clothes. Lean, long arms. No hat, no beard. Clean cut. Watching. He's standing inside the cabin like he belongs there, Elise said. Lane opened the master case file and pulled out a document they'd nearly forgotten. An old report from a gas station employee in nearby Avery County. A man was seen traveling with Tillman, just once. July 8th. The clerk said he looked like a hitchhiker, younger, maybe early 20s. Claimed to be Tillman's nephew, paid in coins, bought rope and batteries. The report was dismissed in 1986. No second suspect was ever pursued, until now. March 31st, 2024, Margaret's house. Austin. Lucia was asleep when Elise and Lane arrived. Margaret sat at the table, fingers trembling as she looked at the new photo. The cabin, the man in the window. This isn't the man she remembers, she whispered. Doris leaned forward. But she remembers two voices. She said it once, years ago, in her sleep. I thought it was just a nightmare. Elise placed a hand on the photo. She wasn't just taken by one man. Margaret looked up. So what happens now? Lane closed the file. We reopen everything. There's still someone out there. Maybe older now. Maybe living under a new name. But he knows what happened to Jim. He knows where Lucia was kept. Margaret nodded slowly. She survived once, she said. We'll help her do it again. April 12th, 2024. Location unknown. A man sits at a workbench in a small, dark room. The only light comes from a television playing a rerun of Highway Patrol. A dusty clock ticks on the wall. He's sorting through old newspapers, clipping headlines. Woman found alive. 38 years after cabin disappearance, Jim Halbrook. Remains identified. Statewide search for second suspect continues. He cuts out one headline and pins it beside dozens of others. His eyes linger on the photo. Then he smiles, just slightly, and returns to his work.